So next up is Helena Richese, who, unfortunately, I think we have seen kind of a steady, sort of slow decline in her power over the course of Dune Imperium, for a few reasons that we'll talk about here. I don't necessarily think that she's a bad leader at this stretch of imagination, but unfortunately, a lot of what makes her very special in the game and like gave her like these crazy powers are just simply not that unique to her anymore, and there are multiple ways of achieving what she kind of does now anymore. So, unfortunately, I think that's her big problem is her uniqueness, and from like the base game where she was borderline, I think, potentially busted, to the Rise of Ix where she was still pretty solid, but kind of had to be used kind of strategically. I think Immortality, we have still seen that slight decline in just, she's just less special now. And while she can do a lot of cool stuff, unfortunately, she's now also at the whims of the other players, kind of getting in her way for once, which of course is very ironic because Helena's whole ability is being kind of non-interactive. And just basically, doing her own thing. You can't really interfere with her, and she just accumulates points, and she's just a hassle. Not really the case so much anymore. So let's talk about her abilities. First up, being able to infiltrate council and city spaces. These have never been bad at all. One thing that Helena does have, which is quite useful at the moment, is that she's not really affected too much by the Swordmaster race that we're kind of seeing at the moment in this way. People trying to get in there very quickly, which means you can pick Helena at any point. As long as you get out of 8 Solari, you can go Swordmaster, unless someone specifically voices it, which is obviously pretty bad for you. But other than that, she can infiltrate in Swordmaster, so that is one advantage she has. Don't have to worry about it at all. That is definitely very useful. And the city spaces also is pretty good as well. One of Helena's, I think, her big strengths in Rise of Ix was being able to manipulate the fact that you could do that, especially with cards like Negotiate Withdrawal, for example, which would allow you to retreat free troops in order to get hold of a faction bump. Of course, with Helena, as long as you've got 3 troops or even 2 troops in your garrison and you can hit a city space outside of that, no one can stop you doing it. You can go to Carthag, you can go to Arakeen, Siege, whatever you want to do, and you can just put those 3 troops in. No one can stop you. You retreat them, you get that faction bump. And that's it. You've just got it, and no one can do anything about that at all. And that's one of Helena's, again, her real strengths in Rise of Ix, and especially in the base game, though for different reasons, is that you just can't really get in her way, and she just she doesn't have to really respond to the changing game state very much, whereas some of her players are a lot more susceptible to kind of having to navigate that. She just does her own thing, if she can get hold of, like, High Council fairly early, she can just pick up Spiceman's Flows, get a decent deck, do some trashing, get hold of a load of intrigues, harass combats, no one's ever safe. And that's obviously very good. But the problem now is that there are so many ways to infiltrate in this game, and that's really tricky. In particular, obviously, now you've got hold of invasion ships, the tech, you've got the Talaxu Infiltrator, you've got the Infiltrate car, the Infiltrate, whatever you want to call it, the Infiltrate Intrigue. You've got several cards that infiltrate various spaces, Bounty Hunter, you've got the triangle one as well. There it is, actually, Embedded Age and stuff like that. So, unfortunately, her abilities just aren't that special to her anymore. The other big crux of her ability as well was Manipulate. Being able to remove a card in the Imperium row, putting it to the side, and acquiring it for 1 persuasion less. Now, this is still pretty good. And she's still very, very capable of obviously looking to pinch and target a lot of very high-value cards, like Trome Directorships, Jessicas, TMs, Tax Masters, that sort of thing. She's obviously very good for that. But the problem with this is the fact that the Imperium row, of course, is no longer stable. And because atomics exists, and at any point you're gonna say, I'm pretty good, and I'm just gonna nuke the row, and that's it. And it means that kind of generally, in general, playing your actions, like targeting specific cards in the Imperium row, is a lot harder now because atomics can always happen, and anyone can do it at any point on their actions. So it's difficult to do that, and it means that Helena's ring is a lot less consistent. Because you might say pick Helena in 4th position. And you saw this a lot, especially in Rise of Ix. Is you pick Helena in 4th position, looking to target a specific card. You pick up you pick up your ring, and you've got it. But now, like if there's say like a row, for example, where that is a Talaxu Master, but not very much else going on, and you're Helena, there is nothing you can do to stop red or green or yellow atomating that row ahead of you. And at a point, you don't know what you're going to get. And any plans that you had, like targeting TS specifically, they're gone. Now, of course, you do have your own atomics as well, and that's its counterpoint, but it is something that she's having to kind of deal with, and it cannot be an advantage for Helena at all, the fact that she has that much control. And obviously, Ecaz as well being in the game can also cause some issue with some of the cheaper cards, with your in the shadows, shifting allegiances, Talaxi Surgeon, that sort of thing. So that is a definite problem for her. It's a simple case that over the course of time, what's made her special unique is just no longer special and no longer unique. And that is just the reality of it. As for advantages that Helena still has in the game, the fact that she has the city infiltration is always going to be good, and means you're always going to be like in the contesting for getting hold of loads of intrigues with Carthag, and that's something that no one can stop you doing, and that's always going to be really powerful to make you tricky to play against. The other thing that's also really good for Helena is being able to the fact that you can go research station. Research station sees a lot more activity now than it did in the Rise of Ix, especially. Like typically you wouldn't see research station until at least the mid game, if not potentially later when people are just buying Spice Must Flows. But because of the research on the side as well, it gives you some extra ancillary benefits. So if Helena can like kind of get hold of a supply of water from still suits, or even like then later on getting hold of the siege and generating that water, you can always go research station and no one can block you, because you do see that a lot sort of like rounds 5, 6, 7, where first off you had like the Swordmaster train, then you get the research station train, and as such being able to completely cut that line is definitely an advantage, no question there. As far as positioning goes for Helena, though, I think she's still probably better suited to being sort of further back in the row, either position 4, position 3. Picking Helena in the opening rows can also be good, again, if you're targeting specific cards like Talaxu Master, especially, or stuff like that. Then maybe picking her in the first, in the first position is not bad, because you can lick to Signet Ring to smuggling, and pull that aside very, very good. But I don't think I really like having Helena in second position anymore, because again, you're almost always going to a faction space or in second position, unless first place decides to go fold space. Other than that, you're going faction. So I don't think Helena's the best in second, but to be honest, you could probably pick anyone second and be happy with it. Helena does have an issue with getting hold of Swordmaster early, as mentioned. The fact that she doesn't have a way of generating slurry on the side. Although she can definitely still cut that line. So, you know, just hitting smuggling whenever. Maybe even finding a way, perhaps, to go still suits, then Great Flat Conspire is not a bad move. If you can go that and get hold of a couple slurry on the side as well, to get hold of your Swordmaster round 3, that's still pretty decent. And I wouldn't hate that at all. But yeah, I just don't think that Helena just doesn't have quite the cutting, incisive edge that she used to. And it's a little bit of a shame, I guess. Again, I never really played her, just didn't suit me. But I do think that's kind of what made her shine previously. Just isn't quite there anymore. So as far as the tier list is concerned, it's fairly reflective as well. I think for Helena, it's got to be a B tier. I think she's pretty middle of the pack at this point, maybe even slightly below middle, perhaps. I think she's fine, and she's, like all leaders, have definitely their spots, but, you know, you think, like, in the original game, like, she's up here, and in Rise of Ix, she's probably here. I really can't put her any higher than B tier now. You know, it's just a lot of what made her unique is not unique. And especially given the Immortality, although Immortality has benefited a lot of the card drawer style leaders, Helena really hasn't received those same benefits, because her deck building strategy is just having a really good deck. And especially in the base game, what you would do is, because the cards were very uneven, there were some really good cards and some pretty rubbish ones, is you just keep reserving the really good ones, keep away from anyone else. Even if you can't buy them some of the time, you just keep them away and just have a better deck than everyone, and you just win. But now the value of the row in general is just so decent, there's so many good cards around, that even if you're reserving a really strong card, there's probably 1 or 2 other really strong cards on that row as well, which you can't deny to your opponents. So yeah, it's got to be a B. I can't put any more than that, realistically. I think she still gets played a fair amount, especially by people that are still kind of new to the game. And I think there is still a little bit of Ix hangover of picking higher in 4th, but I just don't think she's anywhere near the edges she used to. And especially at the higher levels of the game, you just don't see Helena a lot now. She just doesn't quite have what she used to. Bit of a shame, I guess, but I think that is the honest reality. So next up is Viscount Hundro Moritani, one of our introductions from the Rise of Ix, who I think is one of those leaders where, like, he's probably better than sort of the sum of his parts in a way. I think that he's pretty basic to use, nothing complicated. His ring ability is strong and obviously is a massive part of his game plan. Like, you have to play around his ring ability as much as humanly possible, which means you've got to make sure you've got spice in hand all the time. But being able to get that shipping in a space as a combat, obviously, and using that to dump troops in and go over the top of people, obviously very, very scary, and you can do a lot of manipulation. And obviously just hitting more shipping in the hole is obviously very good. So yeah, Courier is very strong, very important to Hundro. I think the most interesting part for Hundro in Immortality is his intelligence ability, which I actually think is probably better now in Immortality in a weird way than it was in Rise of Ix. It felt kind of like a bit of a luxury in Ix, but also felt like you're kind of punting a little bit. And it is always a punt, being able to draw the first 2 intrigue cards and keep one, put the other on top. You never know what you're going to find. There are now, there's 70 intrigue cards in the game. That's a lot of intrigues, and as such, you can't really predict it. But what Hundro does, and I think one of his things, is that he's one of the few leaders that actually aren't bad in, like, sort of first position. We're in this weird spot at the moment. I'll talk about position obviously a bit more in a moment, but we're in this weird position where first isn't viewed currently very strongly, because first is kind of viewed as, like, basically blocking second. And we're kind of, again, this Swordmaster Rush, they can't really get much benefit. But Hundro, because of intelligence, means that he can do some really, really quirky stuff, and he has access to some really funky opening moves that will let him do things that other people just can't do. Just to give a list of some of the intrigues that Hundro can find in first position that let you do really, really tricky things, and a lot of them do mainly revolve around getting hold into the shipping before other people, because again, that's a big part of Hundro's game plan. He's all about basically, you want to hit inside the shipping and then use your ring to deploy it on the field, stuff like that. Very, very strong fit, or even just using your signet ring, going to the shipping and just getting free bumps. Huge action compression, and a lot of them are revolving around that, of course. Bribery, demand respect, finesse, strong arm, expedite to get hold of shipping sooner, obviously just straight faction onto the shipping. But there are some other things that you can do as well. Windfall is actually, I think, pretty underrated. Getting that extra 2 Solari means that you can, it's a way of getting around, if you've got Hundred in, say, second position, you can smuggle, and then use Windfall to get hold of your Swordmaster out of other people, stuff like that. Breakthrough can also be a little tricky as well. Maybe you might want to use that to get an extra beater early, so that you can make a charge force towards this victory point here, or get hold of the intrigue, or maybe even if you've, say, got hold of 2 experimentations in your opening hand, which you obviously don't know when you pick the intrigue, but you can use Breakthrough perhaps to get hold of that 3rd specimen immediately and target some really high value cards up here. So Breakthrough, do not sleep on that. Very, very effective for Hundro Moritani. It also comes with Gruesome Sacrifice, the same sort of thing as well. Rapid is just always good to have because there's only one, no one else does. Urgent Mission, same sort of thing as well. Hitting faction spaces twice. Hundro has a lot of weird things and funky things that he can do from first position just to completely get in second place as well. And as such, I think he's probably one of the best people to pick in first position, just to harass second spot and just try and cause him as much disruption as humanly possible without causing too much disruption to your own game. And this isn't even exhaustive. You see, there's no end game cards here at all. Of course, pretty much all the end game cards are good for Hundro to have. Plans, Corn Mark if you go down that route. All those sort of things. Grand Conspiracy, definitely for Hundro. Very, very capable of doing that as well. So, there's sometimes you're just going to pull intrigues that aren't really good, and again, there's not even any combat intrigues as well. Like if it's if it ends up being a combat that's like for a faction bump, for example, if you can get hold of like ambush or reinforcement or tactician, you're going to be able to take hold of that combat and get that second bump and go shipping immediately. So yeah, Hundro, I think, very dangerous in the open position because he's getting hold of those intrigues immediately. It lets him do some really unorthodox moves, and you've got to be wary of him. And if we do talk about seat positioning in a bit more detail, again, I think he's possibly the best first position leader in the game. I really honestly believe that, where I think a lot of leaders either kind of have some difficulties or are just like outright hampered by being in first position. Hundro can get around that because of those intrigues. And the fact that you can choose which one as well means you can kind of tailor your game however you intend to do it. Obviously, it's a little bit of guesswork. Like, if you go for a combat intrigue, and there's a Baron in the game, for example, you're not guaranteed to win it by any stretch of imagination. But if you go smuggle and then Carfag and just throw some dudes about your signet ring, that's the thing. That's the only thing I would say for Hundro. You always want to see your signet ring. I don't know when you want to see a signet ring in first edition. Do you want to get it immediately? Do you not? I mean, I suppose you probably want to go like Fold Space and then Imperial Basin to get the bump and then try and win it with that. But then it's a little tricky to win the combat if someone goes Hardy Warriors. You might need some dagger help for that. So you got to be a little bit careful of it. But yeah, I think Hundro is very, very capable in first position and it's going to be really, really watched on. If he can get that jump in first position on second place, first can really run away with the game if you're not careful. Second place as well is obviously going to be good for Hundro. The alternative to this is instead of like getting the jump on second position, you use your courier's ability in order to just ship quicker in the first place. And not a bad move for Hundro is to go wealth in the first round if you can. Maybe go like Imperial. If Fold Space goes and you smuggle, for example, if you can get to wealth, then obviously that's a way of getting around the smuggling here. And getting hold of the extra money that you might need and bits and pieces. And again, you still got that intrigue as well. So it's about being tricky at the start and being creative and be willing to take a chance. Try not to play too defensive. You kind of got nothing to lose at the start. If you go for something that doesn't work, it's the way it goes. But yeah, Hundro, I think, in the opening bits of the game, in the opening positions, very, very good. In the back spots, it's a little bit more speculative because now you're starting to get blocked a bit. You're still in the third or fourth. You're going to get access to Imperial Basin like almost all the time with your Signet Ring, so that's never bad, or even Hager Basin. But then you're starting to lose access to faction spots. Maybe going like Steel Suits with the intention of going Great Flat next round if you've got your Signet Ring for your round 2 draw. That's pretty good. Can't hate that at all. But then it's like one of the advice is going Great Flat early. So when you use that, like go Conspire to get your Swordmaster going, which Hundro cannot do because of his Signet Ring. So that can be a little bit tricky. 4 position Hundro, I would say, is probably his weakest by distance, because now, that extra edge of having those intrigues, you're just starting to lose, like, its incisiveness and being able to, like, get the jump on people. They're all acting before you, they're all starting to block ahead of you, and what makes Hundro special at that point, you're starting to lose a little bit of that. So I think, yeah, Hundro for me, pick him early if you're going to pick him. Hope to draw a decent intrigue that you can do something really tricky. Get an early advantage, and if you can get that early advantage, you're off to the races with Hundro. If you don't, you can end up chasing the game a lot, which is a concern. But Hundro can, again, he's very capable in combat because of his courier's ability. Just getting these dudes into combat with shipping is very strong. It's that action compression going on as well. Besides, you never know, you might find those opening intrigues. So for me, I think it's a fairly solid A rank for Hundro. He's one that I don't use a ton, because again, it can be a little bit chancy, but I think A rank is very, very solid for him. You just got to be creative and kind of not be scared with him. Be willing to take a little bit of chances. There are times it just doesn't work out, and that sucks, and you're just chasing the game. And what Hundro, I don't think he's great at. He's not a great chaser of the game. If he falls behind, it's hard to catch up unless you just go all in on combat. And manages to pick up an absolute bucket ton of points. But outside of that, I think it's very important to get a good start of Hundro. So maybe controlling your own destiny in those opening couple of moves, a bit more important for him than other players. But I think A rank for him, I think, is pretty respectable and a decent acclamation as well. I can't really put him any higher than that, though, I don't think. So next up, we're going to talk about Count Ilban, who has been the subject of plenty of discussion in a variety of tier listings. I'm not going to go into that. There's no need to. In my personal opinion, I think Count Ilban, when you think of leaders that have had kind of power changes and shifts from Rise of Ix, and even from base game to Immortality, to me, I think Count Ilban is the one who has benefited the absolute most in that. Especially with this current Swordmaster sort of meta we're finding ourselves in, but also in the fact that the value of card draw is just so big now. Compared to what it used to be, it has gone up in value immensely. To me, I think Ilban is the best improved leader from Rise of Ix to Immortality, and I don't think there's any... I'm trying to think of who else would be along those lines. Lido is possibly there, but Lido was always really good. Paul was possibly there as well, but that was a much lower bar, so maybe not particularly a fair comparison. For me, I think Ilban is the big gainer of Immortality. So let's talk about why that is. We'll go through manufacturing first. So manufacturing is really interesting for Ilban in the fact because Ilban was around in base Dune Imperium. He was one of the 8 leaders originally in the game. Manufacturing back then was not great, being really honest. It was kind of weak. And the reason for that is that as time has gone on, there's budgetly been more and more uses for your Solari and what you're doing with them. has definitely accelerated over the course of the game's lifespan. And that's not obviously not the fact you think back to the original board. You say, well, hold on, Shadow, you had like rally troops, Ilban, going to rally troops for 3 Solari, getting 4 troops and a card draw. That's great value. And you know what? It definitely was great value. But the problem with rally troops is that they were stuck in your garrison. Unless you had like specific like rapid mobilization, you've then got to then spend an action getting those forces into the ground. Maybe there was no way to get troops out. There was no like turn a space into a combat space. There was no, abilities to unload and force troops in. Like it was literally, you had rapid mobilization or you didn't have rapid mobilization. That was basically it. There was no like embedded agent, to or anything. It was just the way it was. So. And the thing was that was where a lot of your slide went in the end of the game. You get your Swordmaster, you get your High Council, maybe some Mentats. But generally speaking, like, it was not impossible for leaders to be at the end of the original game with like 10, 15, 20 Solari sometimes. They just have nowhere to use them. Because, of course, there's only one rally troop space in the first point. But what it does now with Immortality is it allows Ilban to be in position 2 or position 3. And just basically say, if you don't smuggle, I'm smuggling twice, and I'm getting my Swordmaster immediately. And that's huge, because I'm getting so much value from my action economy, and especially the fact when I go to Swordmaster, I'm generating a card. Every time I go to Mentat, I'm generating 2, I'm stalling. It means you've got to overcommit to combat, you don't know what I'm going to do. If I'm sitting with a garrison of 2, 3, or 4 troops, that's really tough for you to defend against, and that is an absolute nightmare for players, and that's just so dangerous. Interesting thing for manufacturing I want to note as well is it actually means Ilban is actually capable of being in first position, because Ilban is one of the, he can actually, if he can get his Signet Ring first round, what he can do is he can kind of double block green in that, or a double block almost the table, in that he can use his manufacturing and go to smuggling. He can actually generate 2 Solari. And whereas a lot of leaders are reliant on going Wealth Mentat, Ilban is the one leader who can go Smuggling Mentat, which is really, really cool. And a very interesting way of being in first position, going Smuggling, then Mentat, and then all of a sudden you're then in position for the combat. And people have got to start guessing what you're going to do. And if they don't have access to Carfags, or, they don't have a lot of faction access down here, they don't go there, and they leave like Hardy Warriors open, I mean, the combat's just yours for the taking. So very, very tricky for him. But for me, the biggest reason why Ilban, I think, is now one of the more feared leaders in the game is, again, because of that ability to draw cards, and it's so dangerous. Because we've talked about the value of the Imperium Row just having increased more and more as the game's gone on, just any card draw you're going to get is going to be decent value. Unless you're like me and you keep going a Mentat with your dagger and drawing your other dagger at the moment. It's pretty frustrating. But in any event, it's beside the point. Yeah, just being able to draw cards is huge, because you're just getting hold of more cards in the points. You can target better value cards in the Imperium Row, which there's always going to be some. They're always going to be really strong. Grafting as well for Ilban is absolutely destructive if you can like dominate Mentat, because as you're drawing more cards, you're going to be able to get cards like Face Dancer, for example, and then combine those with cards that have like decent Asian effects, but you might struggle to use otherwise. Well, there you go. Have fun with that. And it's absolutely crazy. Ilban as well, combined with like Twisted Mentat, can be like absolutely insane as well. I had a game I played I think it was yesterday or 2 days ago. I was playing as Ilban, and I was literally, had Twisted Mentat, was taking the Mentat spot, was doing 5 actions, but I was drawing so many cards doing it, I was still buying Spiceless Flows on the side. Completely ridiculous. And like when Ilban goes off the rails and like gets on that train, he is an amazing front runner. And he can be really, really hard to peg, because even if you start like contesting combats heavily, well, if he's just drawing cards, he can just buy Spice. And that's the thing. Once Ilban gets going, he's scoring pretty much every single round. And that's really hard for a table to keep up with. Very, very scary. So I guess the question is, if you're against an Ilban, like in a second position, like, what do you do? I think ultimately it's a case of, like, you just have to bear in mind that he wants to hit Mentat as much as he can. If he can send his Signet Ring to the Mentat spot, he's spending 1 Solari to draw 2 cards and stall. That's pretty good. That is absolutely brutal, and you just can't let him get away with that a lot. Now, obviously, there's going to be some cases where somebody don't really want to go mentatting a lot, or, or whatever else. And like that isn't suiting their strategy, but just letting Ilban hit Mentat round after round after round, like he's just making the money back, and it's so powerful for him. He's going to be getting hold of so many good cards. His deck quality is going to be so high that he's using these extra actions, drawing these good cards again, and just getting these agent effects. You know, like Ilban, for example, with like Talaxu Surgeon. I mean, good luck. You know, that's a pretty miserable situation for him. But there's just so many dangers. And of course, because he's drawing more cards, he's cycling his deck more, so he's seeing the same things more and more. Which means if you can get like a decent reveal set for Ilban as well, get some good reveals for him, you know, be it with In the Shadows or TM, that sort of thing. I mean, it's just an absolute spiral. And he can go completely out of control. And I have both seen and inflicted some utter devastation as Ilban. This is an image I took from a game that I played a few months ago. This was fairly early into Immortality's lifespan. The Clown Ilban game that I played, where I just utterly eviscerated the table. GVX, Bad Andy, and Dinosaur were in this game here, and just utterly just eviscerated them. You know, you've seen this last combat here, like Helena's gone into this combat here to win it, and I didn't even care. You know, I've look at this deck here, so I just absolutely ran away with it. Got some good cards, admittedly, but played really well for them, and it's like every single move I took was just like everything was awesome. Everything here, everything worked out. You know, you see down here, like I've taken away the Fremen Alliance from the Baron, who, you know, is the Baron, had Wind Traps, had Sayadina, and I still beat him to it. You know, the Emperor Alliance as well, which I took. You know, I was buying Spiceman's Flows, getting hold of I got both Talaxu points as well. Just utter devastation here in this one. I had this crazy spot where I literally feigned that I was out of actions, but had an urgent mission. And I urgent missioned an agent onto Mentat to draw some cards, then go High Council to draw another card to pinch like a Throne Directorship out of the row. Because both were left open, and just use that just to steamroll alliances and get faction points. It's the best game of Doom Period I've ever played. You don't get ones like these often. It's not like other people's decks were that bad. You know, like Helena's deck was really good. Bashar, Shadows, Negotiated, Talaxu Surgeon. She had a Talaxu Master, I think, in her deck as well, and I just completely ran the table over. It makes me wonder why I can't do this more often. But yeah, it's the best game of Dune Imperium that I've ever played in my entire life. So getting back onto topic here, and last mention for seat positioning. So as I've mentioned, Ilban's great everywhere. He's super strong in second or third because you threaten the immediate Swordmaster, and people kind of have to stop you getting that. And of course, if you're in second position, well, you say, well, you're either going to give me immediate Swordmaster, or I'll just go shipping first. What do you do about that? Not a lot. Third position is very similar to that as well. If you don't get that, then again, Wealth Mentat is awesome. Steel Suits Research Station to target stuff up here is also pretty damn good as well. Ilban's just got loads of great uses. But yeah, Wealth Mentat is just so deadly for him early in the game. Fourth position for Ilban is a little tricky. And I think you've got to be a little bit careful, but sometimes you've got to pick him there just to stop him going further down. I think he's that good, potentially. And again, even in fourth spot, like, say, if Fold Space goes, and Smuggling goes, and if Wealth goes, well, then you just hostage Great Flat. You know, you go to Tech Negotiation, you pick up, like, Artillery. You know, you could go Hardy Warriors immediately and just take the opening conflict. There's so many things that you can do as Ilban. At the beginning, super dangerous, loads of chances, and once he gets in front, it's very, very hard to peg back, because he's just almost always picking up points, unless, like, literally the entire table gangs up on him. And even then, like, if he's just buying Spiceless Flows, what do you do about that? The answer is not a whole lot. So is Ilban the best leader in Ix Immortality? First of all, I think it's a pretty subjective question. I think your marginal is going to vary. But I think he's definitely very, very strong. The one thing you've got to be careful with Ilban is you do have to be very careful of who else is going to be in the game. One of the issues you've got with Ilban, say if you pick him fourth position, is say if Lido is in the game and Lido gets picked in third seat, which is very possible with our hidden pick system currently, that's pretty scary, because that is someone who's going to cut out Mentat to you. And Ilban needs to hit Mentat as much as humanly possible. It's a big part of his strength being able to get that. So if the person to the right of you just keeps interrupting with that, I had a game once with an Ilban to my left, and I think I was playing as Beast, you know, not an all contender for Mentat, but I just decided, okay, I went and got Shuttle Fleet, and I was just getting Mentat every single round, because I wasn't shipping, I was just kept hitting Mentat, and Ilban was not having a fun time of it. So Ilban can definitely get interrupted, but I think, like, it's pretty hard to play Ilban and not be, like, there or thereabouts with some winning chances, unless the game just goes completely wrong. I think he's definitely pretty strong. Is he better than Leto? I don't know. It's kind of a weird one. Like, it's the thing is with Ilban and Leto, it's kind of more like it depends what the seating order is. Like, whoever's to the right of the other one probably has the advantage. And Ilban, at the very least, I think is an A tier on this ranking. Is he S tier? It's tough. I think he can high roll and be like base leader in the game. I honestly play other than Ilban. And I don't think he lowballs particularly badly either, because there's always little moves you can do, and that manufacturer is going to help you. You are going to get Menta access somewhere, but sometimes your deck just doesn't draw out particularly well. And if you do have a bad deck, like he can kind of compensate for that a bit, but he does need to try to get rid of those daggers sort of fairly quickly, and not just get rid of daggers, but replace them with something else that's got counter. So you obviously got to make sure you keep some of that. I would say he is at the very least an A rank. And I think he's edging towards S tier. I think I'm going to keep him an A rank for now. Because I just think that he does have some issues with factions sometimes. It's not easy to win a faction with Ilban unless you're going specifically Emperor, or if you're in second position, you get shipping, and then you just jam the Spacing Alliance. But outside of that, like, I think it's not easy for him to get hold of the Bene Gesserit Alliance. I think sometimes Fremen Alliance is typically out of his reach as well. People are going to be competing that far harder. So, but again, just going Emperor Alliance with Ilban, I think is pretty good, because again, you're getting so much value out of Wealth Mentat. And if you're taking that Solari and you're restricting other people and there isn't Solari turning up in combat and smuggling's getting kind of shifted around, and you can dominate that Mentat spot for the first 2-3 rounds, and really inhibit people getting their Sword Masters, you can cause all kinds of havoc on the conflict as well. So I think he's at least A tier. I don't know if I can put into S though. I might read changes at the end of this, but I think that is at least A tier, I think, for me on this list. So next up, we have Ilesa Ecaz. So Ilesa was introduced in the Rise of Ix expansion, which is kind of interesting because, being brutally honest, I don't actually think she was really ever that suited to Rise of Ix. Rise of Ix was such a shipping-heavy variant, and Ilesa just didn't really suit that at all, so it's kind of curious. So let's talk about Ilesa. I think a significant part of her gameplay strategy comes around one step ahead. So at the start of a round, what you do is Ilesa, before anyone takes any actions, is you draw your 5 cards and you put one down, like say here for example, and that could be whatever it is, sea cards, anything like that. On your second action, you reveal the card, and then if you play it, you get hold of a resource, be it either 1 Solari or 1 Spice, depending on the agent icons. And that's really good, which is decent passive resource generation on the side. And it's something that not a lot of leaders are very good at doing, find those resources and keeping your economy driven. But obviously the problem with that is you've then got to predict, are you going to be able to use the card? Now, in Rise of Ix, this was difficult because typically, like, it's hard to know how to, you're predicting anywhere from 4 actions ahead, or 3 actions, I suppose in theory, if you're first position, you'll know what your first action is going to be. So you're predicting, 1, 2, 3 actions. But if you're in 4th position, you're predicting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 actions. And as such, it's really hard to kind of be specific with what you're doing, unless you have exclusive actions somewhere and you know you're going to get it. But the passive generation of resources was really, really good. Now, in Rise of Ix, I don't think they really mattered because it was all about shipping. But now that Immortality exists, there's a lot more different ways to play the game, and there's more ways of getting hold of exclusive active spaces. She can rely on that a lot more, be it like daggers to like Mentat or Tech Negotiation, be it getting hold of Water to get hold of instead of shipping. Maybe she's got a load of resources like Spice. She can go like conspiring or highlining, anything like that. All that lovely good stuff. Now, originally, the way it was designed with the game is that whole one step ahead was basically designed to pay for her signet ring, guild contacts, paying a Solari for a fold space. Now, people kind of underestimate how effective those fold space cards are. Being able to, bank a card that lets you go anywhere when you draw it is huge, and she's meant to be kind of like, she can either like predict specifically or just be really flexible and kind of go between the two. But it does make a very challenging leader to play, generally speaking. But the idea was that you'd play your signet ring to somewhere, wherever it is, gain a Solari, and use your signet ring basically to get hold of a fold space card to play later on. That was the way it was originally designed. Now, the idea was, as well for Ilesa, that while the passive resource generation is pretty good, and don't get me wrong, it's pretty strong, the fact you had to put a card down ahead of time to kind of predict what's going to happen in order to use it was meant to be kind of like the drawback on the side, and you had to kind of try to figure ahead of what was going to happen, or maybe just kind of hedge your bets and kind of play a nondescript card. You know, trying to get hold of that spice was really tricky. Unfortunately, that has changed a heck of a lot, and the reason for that is called graft cards. And what you've now got a situation is, the way it works is one step ahead, when you put a card down, if it's involved in a graft action, only the card that you put down matters in regards to the one step ahead ability. It doesn't matter what else you put on it. So for example, let's say if you're playing as Ilesa Ecaz, and I don't know, let's say you've got hold of Stitched Horror, and you put this down, well, when you go to use the card here, well, one step ahead, let's look, there's only one agent icon, we get hold of a spice, awesome. But of course, you don't have to go to a city space with a graft card. You might decide to go to a faction space. You might decide to go mining. You might have a card like Fufir or Occupation or Jessica or Keys to Power. And you start seeing basically the big disadvantage to having the one-step ability is basically completely ignored. And you don't have to worry about it. You're still getting that extra spice bonus, but you're not really hampering yourself in any particular way, because Stitch Horror is such a good card, and it's a sort of card where it doesn't really matter if you play it immediately. You can play it whenever you want in your turn, and you're getting the beetle, and you're getting the water, unless you're going for something specific, which is not, you know, sometimes you have to. You know, you can do that. But of course, you can play other cards in the Stitched Horror. I mean, pretty much any card in the game that drafts and has only one icon on it is incredibly powerful for lasers. So playing Coupling is going to be one of them. Benny Talaxu Research is going to be one of them. You know, or whatever else you want to do here. Incest Conspiracy, exceptionally powerful, because you can buy that with anything you want, and you can send it to a faction space and just get hold of tons of resources. Super, super powerful. And then we go into, obviously, the Talaxu deck. Talaxu Infiltrator is awesome. Gola's gonna be awesome as well. You know, stuff like that. Chair Dog, Slig Farm. There's so many of these. You know, Guild Impersonator. And of course, what you can also do is, if it's a faction spot that you want to get hold of that has, say, you've got Infiltration on, so you're looking at Bounty Hunter, you're looking at Web of Power, for example, anything that you have Infiltration from, or if you've got Invasion Ships, you can just put down the card you're going to go to second action and not even have to worry about it. There are a lot of ways now to basically get around the downside of one step ahead and basically just generate a spice for free almost every single round. That is really powerful, and you think over the course of, you know, 7-8 rounds, that's going to be basically like 6 spice. That's a highliner on the house. That's crazy. And so what you end up getting is a situation where you don't often see Ilesa Ecaz getting picked in games, but what happens is that the games she then gets picked on are board situations that immensely benefit her, because there is just an absolute plethora of graft cards, and she can just target them and just use that to power one step ahead, and she basically ignores her own downside and just has loads of resource generation on the side. And of course, as well, with if you have those graft cards, is if you also, say, getting hold of those fold spaces with guild contacts, you can just do anything you want, and you're not even worried about it at that point at all. So absolutely strong, and it's why you sort of see with Ilesa in sort of the stat vids like Cheeseball does. Doesn't get picked often, but has a really high win rate. Doesn't mean she's the best leader in the game. It just means that you don't often want to pick her, but when you pick her in a good board, she is really dangerous and can just be kind of uncontrollable. So let's talk about seat positions for Ilesa, and it's a kind of tricky one here. I don't speak from a ton of experience. I've played a few Ilesa games, but not a ton. It's very interesting. Of course, at the start of the game, the further back that you decide you're going to go ahead and put her in the row, the harder it is to know what you're doing with your one-step ahead ability, because you don't necessarily know what spaces the people ahead of you are going to get to. Like, if you could go to fourth spot and know, like, for sure that you're gonna be able to get to steel suits and thus put down, like, your reconnaissance, you can go to research station and take these cards, great. But the odds are, if you're doing that and the row is that good, it's very possible that one of the 3 players are going to do that ahead of you. And if you've got your recon down, that kind of sucks because you might, then start getting involved in combat. It might not be very good for you, so it can be a bit double-edged. I think Ilesa probably is better off being picked earlier in the row than later on because it just gives you more control over one step ahead in the first place. And really, again, I think if you're going to pick her, going Still Suits Research is a fairly solid opening round for her. But the problem is you have to draw both your both draw a diplomacy card and a card that gets you to Research Station, which is common but not guaranteed. So you got to have a plan B in case that doesn't come off because you're not going to know until you draw your hand, and that can be definitely pretty tricky. So be careful of that. Another options you can go maybe later on is maybe going like, you want to get access at the beginning of the game is take moves that gives you exclusive access to certain spaces that can't get interrupted. So maybe in third position you decide to, go Wealth so that you can have a dagger down for Mentat and get hold of that spice. Maybe have her in second position. So that second round, like if first blocks fold space and you go block smug and you go fold space, then second round you can go fold space and then your second card's gonna be something that gets you in the shielding and you get an extra spice. If you'll think of here, where are you gonna get exclusive access to first and how much advantage can you take advantage of that? So I think it's very important of her, which is why I think, fourth spot is kind of tricky for her. I also would argue as well, the problem with having a back end is the road. Again, a lot of her game plan is kind of like grafting, using grafting to get around one step ahead. So if the further back you are in the row, the harder it is to get those graft cards because people are just going to reveal before you and might start taking them. That's a problem. And of course, like you say, once you've got hold of those graft cards, it doesn't really matter what your seat position is anymore from one step ahead because you're just going anywhere you want anyway. You're just getting those resources. So I think Ilesa's probably got to be opening 2. Third, I think is fine. I don't think I'd ever want to pick her in fourth position. I just don't think that's worth it. You're having so many issues at that point. You can pick better leaders. But yeah, first or second or third, I think are totally fine. So, kind of an exotic leader, really, that you're kind of playing around with. And again, I think she can be a lot of fun to use, and I think she can be one of the more entertaining leaders to use in the game. But you've got to be very, very selective of her. And while I could say that, like, when she runs hot, like, she can be, like, absolutely crushing the game, I could never put her up here because you have to think about, generally speaking, and her abilities. And it's not fair to judge leaders on, like, what their highest capacity is and rank them on that. I think you've got to think about general gaming. And because the fact that there's a lot of boards where Ilesa, I just don't think it makes sense to pick her at all. I think I've probably got to put her at B, even though that obviously when you're picking her, like, she's probably at A tier minimum because you're picking her specifically for a particular type of row and cards like that. But if you're not picking her like 85% of the games, then I don't really think I can justify that. So I think B, it's a solid B. If you use her well, you can do a lot of fun stuff and be really, really tricky. But if you were to use her like every game, you would find there'd be a lot of problems. Again, it's Immortality. It's about getting those graph cards and just abusing them as much as humanly possible. That's what you want to do. And if you can do that, then have fun. But if you can't, you've got some problems. So next up is my boy, Atreides. I'm still probably, like, my favorite leader in the game. Not my most successful, but just the one I have probably the most fun with overall. It just allows me to be really, really creative and just have kind of a blast, really. And while I admittedly did sometimes pick him as a bit of a protest pick in Rise of Ix, because I just didn't want to go shipping. So I'm like, well, let's pick the leader who's probably the worst in Rise of Ix. And I honestly think Atreides might well have been the worst Rise of Ix leader. It just didn't suit him at all as my camera horribly focuses there. He has also been a huge gainer in Immortality. Again, because the ability of card draw and being able to kind of, get the most out of that. But I think the thing that's been big for Paul is that you don't have to ship now. And that there are a lot of different routes to try and achieve success. And Paul Atreides has always been one of those, he's kind of the jack of trades. In Rise of Ix, you're much better off picking leaders that maybe only do one particular thing, but do that one particular thing really damn well. Paul doesn't really do that. He's obviously very reliant on the cards he draws and kind of crafting your deck as you go. And also being able to use prescience in order to chain like your moves in a way that other people can't do because you know what you're going to draw into. So it gives you a lot more freedom to do crazy stuff. So Paul, I think it definitely has improved a lot there. Now, as much as I want to extol the virtues of Paul Atreides, I can't sit here and tell you he's the best leader in the game, because he still isn't. Again, it comes from a very low bar in Rise of Ix, where he was like really, really hard to use effectively. but had some really cool niche things you could do. And while he's improved on mortality, I don't think he's great usually. The problem with Paul is that his advantages are fun, but they are a bit random, and it's kind of hard to manipulate what you're doing a lot. The other issue with Paul Atreides is that the leaders that are around him do affect him a lot. In particular, if you play Paul Atreides and you're against the likes of kind of like Baron Harkonnen and Tesia and, you know, like a Yuna, for example, or a Hundro, then you're the sole deck crafter, realistically, and you can really kind of make that your advantage and kind of your edge in the game. But if you play Paul Atreides and your opposition turns out to be Ilban and Leto and Ecaz, then you're just kind of dead, because they're all deck crafters and they all do the same thing. And unfortunately, Paul just kind of gets edged out a lot. Honestly, his Priestess ability, while cool, isn't as effective. It just isn't, and that's unfortunate. So if you can pick Paul and know that you're probably the only deck guy around, and you can get to Mentat a lot as well, especially, I think Mentat is very important to Paul Atreides in this game, then that is huge. But if there's a lot of other deck craft around, you've probably got to let him go, which is a shame as well. What I will say to people who want to play Paul Atreides, give him a spin, is that there's two pieces of advice I would give you. The first off is that you need to absolutely use prescient and card draw as much as you physically can and make absolute full use of it. The beauty of Paul Atreides is the fact that if you're doing moves with your Signet Ring, for example, especially sort of in the mid-game, and you know what you're drawing into, and the problem is that there's sometimes that people want to make certain kinds of moves, like say they'll go to Arakeen, for example, get involved in a combat, but they still want to buy a Spice Must Flow. Well, the problem is that they're just drawing a card, and if they've got 8 cards to draw from, and if they've still got like a couple of cards that don't have persuasion, be it daggers or Spice Must Flows, or cards that don't give persuasion, there's a chance that they don't buy it, and that could be off-putting. Of course, with Paul Atreides, you don't have to worry about that because you know what you're drawing into, and that means that you can make those moves a lot more confidently, and you can kind of, you know, use that as your edge. You can take those chances. It also means that if you've got anything that lets you draw a card anywhere, obviously his ring's a good example, but like Holo Projector example, if you can get Paul Atreides and Holo Projectors, like, you are like immediately a tier better in this game. You go straight from like probably what is like probably a B tier, I think honestly, to A tier. Being able to do that just basically means you've got a much bigger hand at your disposal, and you always know what you're going to draw into. So you can chain together these really funky sets of moves and darting around the board and being a real hassle, and you don't have to worry about it because you know what you're going to have, you know what you're going to be revealing. And the other thing as well that people forget is because you know what you're going to draw, it also means that sometimes you know not to draw, because sometimes you don't want to. And we've all had those situations, for example, right, it's the start of the game, and you decide to go combat in first round as Arakeen. You've used like your Seek allies to go, like, say, Fold Space. Like a classic example here is, let's say you're playing as Baron Harkonnen, for example, and your first action, you go to Fold Space, you get your bump there, and then your second action, you've kind of got involved in combat because you want to. You go Arakeen, and you draw your other diplomacy card. And you're like, oh man, that absolutely sucks. Well, as Paul, don't have to worry about that because you know you're going to draw that. So, for example, if I'm playing as Paul, that's not a concern. I can be in the exact same position, and I can play as Paul, and I can go Fold Space. But I know that this time, if my next card is Diplomacy, I know not to go there. I know I need to go Imperial Base and pick up some Spice, maybe go Tech Negotiation, maybe just hit like a Wealth spot, or maybe Secret, well, I can't go there yet, actually. But you get the idea. You can avoid absolutely screwing yourself over in the beginning rounds, where, like, again, in second position, being the first person to hit a space twice is so valuable that when you surrender that advantage, it's really, really devastating. You've got to be really careful about that. So that's an interesting kind of sideline for Paul here, and the fact that knowing that you don't want to pick certain cards sometimes can be really, really huge. The other piece of advice I give to you if you're playing as Paul is don't be afraid. Take chances and just go wild. Paul is still not the best of leaders, and especially in Rise of Ix, like, I would play Paul if I just wanted to play a game where I had absolutely nothing to lose and I was happy to take chances. Because you play Paul in Rise of Ix, you're not expected to win the game because he's a long way behind some of the other leaders like Tesia and Baron and Beast. It's so far behind that you're kind of, it's basically a free punt. That's not to say that Paul Atreides can't win games. Of course he can. But there's definitely expectation that you're not going to. And that would mean sometimes you can get away with certain things where, like, the Baron and Tess will be more focused on blocking each other, which means that you can sneak in with some extra trips to faction spaces you would normally, because they're preoccupied with each other. And you can kind of get around that. Bit meta-y, not particularly relevant for this. But yeah, take chances with Paul. Draw cards as much as you can. Get involved in combats. Like, Signet Ring to Arakeen first round is really, really tricky as well, because you're drawing 7 cards your first hand, potentially. If not, maybe even more, depending on what you do. You know, like, I've had a round before where I've gone, like, Wealth, Mentat, and Arakeen with Signet Ring, and I'm drawing 8 cards. And what that means, and the great thing for Paul, is it means that round 2, no one has any idea what you've got. One of the weaknesses of round 2, sometimes, especially when you get involved in combat, is people can look at your discard and say, right, he's used both his daggers, so I know that I can take advantage of him in combat and put pressure on him, and he can't really do much about it. But if you're Paul Atreides, you've drawn 7 cards, like, no one really has any idea what your next hand is, because not only might you find, like, your Signet Ring again, or those daggers again, you convince again, what it means, you're having a big hand, and it means you're buying decent cards in the Imperium row, and you are possibly finding those round 2. And if you can get Imperium row cards into your hand round 2 and you're using them, that's big. That is absolutely huge. And you got to take absolute full advantage of that. Grafting also can be a good way to get around that. Like, Face Dancer for Paul Atreides is just everything he ever wanted. But again, you've got to make sure you pick him. I think specifically, don't pick him just for the sake of it. Pick him in a situation where you feel you're going to get a lot of use out of Prescience, where there's a lot of cards around that are going to let you do the card drawing. And if you are playing as Paul, you might well want to just beeline for Holo Objects immediately. If you can get that, makes him so much better at this game. Really, really important. I think Paul Atreides' flex means that he's probably better suited to playing in either the 3rd or 4th positions. You know, being able to take advantage of, like, the creativity that you can have on offer to come up with some really funky chains of moves can be awesome. Paul Atreides, again, drawing Wealth Mentat is solid, especially if you can do it with your Signet Ring, because not only are you drawing 2 cards, you know what one of them are going to be. Very, very strong. And also another option you have as well, if you're targeting, say, like, you know, decent Talaxuro cards, is if you can go to Still Suits and then Research Station with Signet Ring, you're drawing 3 cards, which means that, you know, even if you only got 1 experimentation in your hand, you can go to Research Station and feel fairly likely that you're going to find that other experimentation and target that free specimen card immediately, be it Stitched Horror, Gola, you know, all those sorts of bits and pieces. You know, Piter, especially Piter de Vries with Paul Atreides, mwah, beautiful, beautiful stuff. So, but unfortunately, he's not great with factions, and he's not great at going Swordmaster early, so picking him in 2nd or 1st spot is, especially 2nd spot, feels kind of bad, because you can just pick so many other better leaders. Picking him 1st spot, I mean, I guess, I mean, you could go, like, smuggling with your Signet Ring and then do something, but I think typically Paul, 3rd or 4th spot, from my experience of playing him, I think are his most interesting spot, and the most enjoyable as well. Like, Paul is not necessarily the most effective leader, but I still think he can be one of the most fun to play, because you can just do all sorts of crazy stuff, and just have a good time, really. So, tier listing Paul is kind of tough, because there's a lot of mitigating factors as to how successful he's going to be. I'd love to, but I can't. I want to, but I don't think I can. I think Paul's got to be a B tier. Now, again, bear in mind that in Rise of Ix, he was, like, down here somewhere. Like, he has improved substantially with the access to immortality. He's a much more viable leader. But the problem for Paul is he's got to kind of be the only real card drawer. And if, like, Ilban and Leto and Ecaz are in the game, you just lose your uniqueness in the edge. It's kind of a similar thing to, like, why Helena's down here now, in that stuff. A lot of stuff that makes her unique is just available to other players now, and that means that it's very difficult for her to kind of be, like, ultra competitive. Paul's kind of a similar one. If there's a lot of warmongers about and you're playing as Paul, great, you can have a lot of fun with that, but you can get really cramped by other leaders. They start taking Mentat. If you need action economy as Paul, very, very important, definitely. You're gonna have to buy some Spice of Flows. It's almost mandatory with Paul unless you go absolute all-in on combat, which you can do. But even if you go all-in on combat, you probably still want to buy a Spice with Flow somewhere just by drawing so many cards. That's absolutely vital for him. So I think it's a B tier for Paul. I don't think I can make him any higher. I think as much as I really want to, I gotta be realistic here. He can be up here definitely when you play him, but there's a lot of factors that kind of just knock him down here. So, but definitely a vast improvement on where we were.